Donald Trump may be creating the biggest political problem of his second presidency. And no, it's not inflation, it's not China, it's not Iran. It may be JD Vance. Because over the last few months, something strange has started happening inside the Republican Party. The man many Republicans see as Trump's natural successor keeps being placed in situations where success is difficult, failure is highly visible, and the political risks fall almost entirely on him. At the same time, Donald Trump keeps reminding everyone that he, not J.D. Vance, is still the center of gravity inside American politics. Now, that raises a fascinating question. If Vance is supposed to inherit the MAGA movement, why does Trump sometimes appear to be making his path harder? And if that pattern continues, could the biggest threat to JD Vance's future come not from Democrats, but from the man who brought him into the White House? Today we're going to look at the growing tension inside the Republican Party, the battle that may already be underway over who leads the movement after Trump, and why a diplomatic mission thousands of miles away may tell us more about the future of American politics than any campaign rally. Let's begin. For most of modern American history, vice presidents have had a fairly predictable job: stay loyal, avoid scandals, be visible enough to remain relevant but not so visible that you overshadow the president. It's a delicate balancing act. Some vice presidents have managed it successfully. George Bush Sr. became president after serving under Ronald Reagan. Joe Biden eventually reached the White House after serving under Barack Obama. Others never escaped the shadow of the administration they served. The challenge is simple: you need to prove you're capable of leading without making the current leader nervous. And that challenge becomes exponentially harder when the current leader is Donald Trump. Trump's political brand has always revolved around one thing above all else: attention. Whether people support him or oppose him, the conversation usually revolves around him. He dominates headlines, he dominates political debates, and perhaps most importantly, he dominates his own movement. That's been one of his greatest strengths. But it may also create a problem, because movements eventually need successors. And right now, many Republicans believe J.D. Vance is the most likely candidate to inherit Trump's coalition. Not everyone agrees. Some Republicans prefer Marco Rubio. Others hope a governor emerges from outside Washington. But if you had to identify the single politician most frequently described as Trump's heir apparent, Vance would probably top the list, which is exactly why recent events are attracting attention. Over the last several months, Vance has been increasingly involved in sensitive diplomatic efforts. Unlike Trump, whose political style is often confrontational, Vance has tried to cultivate a different image: the image of a negotiator, a strategist, a politician capable of turning chaos into agreements. Whether that image is deserved or not is almost beside the point. Politics is partly about perception, and the perception was beginning to work. Photos emerged of Vance working long hours, meeting foreign officials, participating in high level discussions, appearing engaged in the actual mechanics of government. For a politician with presidential ambitions, that's valuable, very valuable. And this is where the first storyline of our video begins. Can JD Vance successfully build a presidential profile while serving under Donald Trump? But there is a second storyline running at the same time. Does Donald Trump actually want anyone building a presidential profile while serving under Donald Trump? Because those are not necessarily the same thing. Many observers noticed something unusual during recent negotiations involving Iran. At several critical moments, when discussions appeared to be moving toward potential breakthroughs, Trump publicly inserted himself into the story. Now, supporters would argue that's completely normal. He's the president. Major diplomatic developments should involve the president. Fair point. But critics saw something different. They saw a pattern in which Trump repeatedly ensured that any major achievement remained associated with him rather than with the officials carrying out the negotiations. Again, this doesn't prove sabotage, but it does raise questions. Questions that become even more interesting when combined with Trump's public comments. At one point, Trump joked that if negotiations succeeded, he would take the credit. If they failed, Vance would take the blame. Supporters laughed, critics raised eyebrows, because jokes often reveal something about how politicians think. And whether Trump meant it literally or not, that statement captured a political reality. Success has many fathers, failure usually has one. Imagine the position Vance finds himself in. If negotiations succeed, the White House celebrates. Trump takes center stage. If negotiations collapse, Vance becomes associated with the failure. That's not an ideal position for someone trying to build a future presidential campaign. But the situation becomes even more complicated when we look at another name, Marco Rubio. Because while Vance has been receiving attention, Trump has repeatedly praised Rubio as well. One day Vance is described as brilliant, the next day Rubio is described as exceptional. One week Vance appears to be the future. The following week Rubio appears equally important. At first glance, this might seem harmless. After all, presidents routinely praise members of their administration. But politically, the effect is significant. Instead of creating a clear successor, Trump is creating competition, and competition serves a purpose. A politician who is competing for favor remains dependent on the person granting that favor. History offers plenty of examples. Kings use this strategy. Emperors use this strategy. Political leaders throughout history have often preferred ambitious subordinates who compete with each other rather than unite against the leader. Now, before anyone gets carried away, this isn't medieval Europe. We're talking about modern American politics. But the underlying logic isn't entirely different. As long as Republicans are debating Vance versus Rubio, they're not discussing a post Trump Republican Party. They're still discussing Trump, which may be exactly where Trump wants the conversation to remain. And this brings us to perhaps the most important question of all. What happens after 2028? The Constitution prevents Trump from seeking another term, at least under the current legal framework. Yet Trump continues to dominate Republican politics in a way few modern presidents ever have. Even after winning elections, most presidents eventually become less influential inside their own party. Trump has largely avoided that fate. The Republican Party remains deeply tied to his personality, his supporters, and his political brand. That creates both an opportunity and a danger for Vance. The opportunity is obvious. If he successfully positions himself as the legitimate heir to the movement, he could begin a presidential campaign with enormous advantages. The danger is equally obvious. Trump may not be ready to hand over the spotlight, and even if he eventually does, there may be other contenders waiting: Rubio, governors, senators, media personalities. The field could become crowded very quickly, which is why every diplomatic mission, every negotiation, every public appearance matters. Because Vance isn't merely governing, he's auditioning. Every vice president who hopes to become president is. The difference is that most vice presidents don't have to audition while standing next to one of the most dominant political figures in modern American history. And that's why this story matters. On the surface, it's about diplomacy, it's about negotiations, it's about the daily business of government. But underneath, it's about succession, it's about power. It's about who leads one of the world's most influential political movements after the man who built it finally leaves the stage. And despite all the headlines about foreign policy, economics, and elections, that question may end up being one of the most important political stories of the next several years. Because if JD Vance succeeds, he could become the next standard bearer of the Republican Party. But if he fails, the future of the movement becomes much less predictable. And perhaps that's exactly why this story is worth watching. Not because we know how it ends, but because right now nobody does. And in politics, uncertainty is often where the most important battles begin. Is JD Vance truly Trump's successor? Or is the battle for the future of the Republican Party only just beginning? Okay, that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe and tell me what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.